Hey everyone. Today we're going to talk about the powers of innovation, culture, and leadership in Israel, the startup nation, which is a subject I really love and I'm connected to. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And today with me, I have Janet Sernack. Hi, Janet.
Hi, Addie. How nice to be here.
I'm so happy that you're with me. Janet is the founder and the CEO of ImagineNation. Great to be with you here. I'm so happy that you're joining me. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're much invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And now we can start. So before we start all of that, we have to just make it clear. Why are we talking about Israel? You're from Australia, and I'm not going to be the interviewee. So you're going to tell me why we're talking about Israel and tell us your story and how did you become to teach people how to innovate like an Israeli.
Okay, so my first exposure to Israel was when I was 18 and young and gorgeous and idealistic. I went and spent a year on a kibbutz and went right across, the whole volunteer experience. I went with a group of fellow Australians, and I always loved the Israeli culture. I always really loved the energy and the optimism and enthusiasm of the people that I met. And finally, I did get back there in 2010 when my husband and I made a very life-changing decision to relocate to Israel. And we ended up living in a beautiful Mediterranean city called Zichron Yaakov. And what happened is, despite having left a very successful career here and business here in Australia, I was from Sydney, where I was top of my field in corporate learning and culture change and change management. Suddenly I arrived in this amazing place that couldn't have been more different than what it was when I was 18. And I discovered pretty quickly that everything I knew just didn't matter in that environment. So one of the things that they say about Israel is that it operates on the edge of chaos. And
That's
the
right.
other and the other thing they say about Australia is that, we have this amazing quality of life and we're really comfortable. And so, it was chalk and cheese. And despite having had more experience, I think at that point I had like 25 years of experience in the whole corporate arena. Everything I knew and all the models and all of the tools in my kit were really irrelevant in a culture that was constantly in a state of volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. So I had the opportunity to actually either start doing sales training or negotiation training for Israelis trying to sell to America, or to let go of all of what I knew and come from a beginner's mind and seek a new possibility for reinventing myself. And ultimately, that's what I chose to do.
Wow, that's a great story. So, in an innovative situation, an innovative country, you find yourself innovating yourself in a sense, right?
Yeah, total reinvention. I just discarded. And the other thing too is that Israel's very paradoxical. Whenever you speak to an Israeli, Adi hasn't done it yet, but I'm sure she will during this session. They always talk about two hands. On the one hand, you can think of it like this, and on
Yeah.
the other hand, you can think of it like that. So we learnt the two hands approach, which ultimately became the basis for one of the skills that we teach in our programs, which is called
Wow.
paradoxical thinking, is to always work with what is and with what could be. So we talk about both and Israel is the land of both and.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen. You have this
No.
necessity for survival, and adversity breeds inventiveness and innovation. And on the other hand, you have tikkun olam, let's make the world a better place. Let's find a problem to solve, see how we can add value to humanity. And you just have this constant collision of two contradictory programs going on. So
Yeah. It's so funny because when you're in it, I could tell you that I just found out about it only like in the last year or two when I started to work more with Europe. It's like it's the first time I understood that there is this kind of thinking, because it was so obvious for me that everybody's like that. And it's strange that you're talking about chaos, because I wrote a book, Innovating Through Chaos, and I talked about the chaotic situation in Israel. So it's really interesting to see someone who's coming from the inside, and will surely see things that we don't fathom, we don't understand even. And it's really, really like interesting to see the things that I found obvious, that maybe they are not that obvious in other places, I guess. So as you see it, why Israel is so innovative? Why is it like the startup nation?
yes, well, I didn't know that either until I got the book, Startup Nation, and read the book, and I thought, oh, I didn't know this aspect of Israel either. So one of the things that I did in the first year was, fortunately, I still had projects going on in Australia, so I didn't actually need to look for work, was that I could let go of my good haircuts and my nice wardrobe and having to wear makeup every day and and all
Yeah.
my roles and former identities, and just be fully present to what was really going on. And because my background is at that point was, I don't know, 20 years in organizational culture research and analysis and diagnosis, I could actually just observe at a very deep level what were the cultural drivers. So on the one hand, see, here I go. On the one hand, I could immerse myself in the startup lifestyle, because 11 years ago, no one knew about startups. This is just like, and there was this whole new language of nimble and agile and iterate and pivot. And, now it's in our vernacular, but 11 years ago, people just didn't talk minimal viable product, lean, how do all these bits fit together? And on the other hand, I could look, from a systemic perspective, what's driving this amazing culture. And I actually came out and have presented over the years some of those key drivers. So we were taught here in Australia, it's really interesting, that survival culture is bad, because it breeds power and control and competitiveness. And probably you do have all of that stuff going on
Sure.
in Israel.
Sure.
But it also pushes you to do things that that make you feel uncomfortable, and we call that discomfort resilience now. And Israelis are just so comfortable with being uncomfortable that they don't even notice that they do that anymore.
Yeah.
So you do have this sort of survival culture, and it does collide with that Jewish value of tikkun olam and let's save the world and make the world a better place. So you're actually seeing this collision, and there are other collisions too, because it's a very argumentative culture, which is so indicative of the
I
current.
love this word. It's like,
The
it
current,
sounds good, argumentative.
yeah,
It's not like too rude. It's argumentative. That's a good word.
it's very, if you're going to a conversation with an Israeli, there's always, a difference in points of view. So, and that's very much reflected by the current political situation. On the other hand, through necessity, they've built this incredible ecosystem. Now, everyone talks about ecosystems now, but nobody knew about ecosystems 11 years ago. So, whilst you do have this argumentativeness, it enables them to maximize the diversity of the 104 different cultures that live in Israel, who are glued together only by their Jewish peoplehood, which is another whole complex issue. So you have that. So you have all the differences. So there's so much diversity there. But on the other hand, you have this willingness to collaborate at a very high level. So the government collaborates with venture capitalists who collaborate with high-tech firms, who collaborate with universities, who collaborate with startups. And so they collaborate internally. It's called competitiveness. They collaborate internally to compete externally. So you have this
Yeah.
dissonance. We now call that cognitive dissonance, going between these two streams.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying about collaboration in Israel, I think that it's a very small country and everybody
Yes,
knows everyone more or less, and I could meet someone the first time and I just talk to him for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, we'll find someone that we know together. So it's like, it's built in because you know that it's some kind of elaborated family, and
yes,
with family you usually collaborate. You know that you have so many similarities that you don't have any other choice, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing about the startup ecosystem, they're so used to sharing knowledge, to talking to each other,
yeah,
to tell each other, this is a mistake I've done, you could avoid it or not, but this is what I learned, which is so important, especially when you're just starting with an idea. And startups, they are starting. It doesn't matter if it's your fourth initiative and you're an entrepreneur, and it's still a new thing. And it's so important to avoid some kind of a mistake that somebody else might have done in the past, if you could.
yeah. And mentorship is really generous in Israel. We even ran a here we go, I'll go off track a bit. We even ran a business networking meeting every week for 4 years for speakers, English speakers in the 5-town area, which was, if in Israel, if you don't network, you don't work. So, the willingness to learn from others was huge, and they were, a lot of businesses have flourished as a result of that. So there is the ecosystem, and I think if you go up a level, the ecosystem ensures survival and international competitiveness, really, and growth. So that's high level. So we always say that in Israel, what binds people together is that they are passionately purposeful about the survival and continuity of the state, even though they may disagree about how that should be done.
They always disagree in general,
Yeah, it
and
does make
you will
for a
hear
richer
it.
decision. Oh, yeah. The second thing that I noticed is that there's this notion, we've always, being brought up as a Jewish person outside of Israel, you're always told that, what does it say? It's Judaism is a faith and a way of life. But I think when you live in Israel, you really learn that it's about Jewish peoplehood. So, there are the Jewish values. There is that strong sense of solidarity, and I'll use the term ichpatli. I really care. I really care about the world. Tikkun olam, I want to repair the world. And there's still maybe not so many idealistic kibbutzim left, but it was the altruism and the legacy of the kibbutzim. So the Israelis will play in the place of possibility to make the world a better and a fairer place. That's really strong. I met the most amazing people in so many different modalities of caring, things I'd never heard of up until I'd lived there. So the other thing I noticed is that you've got, here you go, rigid order and random chaos.
Rigid order? Where do you see
And
rigid order? Like in the army?
yeah, it's a really good point. So you've got this whole, remember Israel's a very young country. It's only
Yeah.
70 something years old.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have a lot of cultural norms. So people can pretty well do what they like.
Yeah,
where,
another thing
being,
that makes us really, really young. Oh, first, we're cutting each other in the middle of a sentence,
yeah,
but you're used to that. Is is the fact that we have lots of kids. It's really a young country because we
yeah,
have many kids, and when you walk in the streets, you see many kids and young people.
it is really country for youth, absolutely. But on the other hand, it's also got that pioneering spirit, because you had all of these academics and musicians and philosophers go there and, build these centres like Zichron Yaakov, where we were. So there's this pioneering spirit, and the word in Hebrew is bitsui, be pragmatic. So
And
they're very
we say
courageous.
tachlis, tachlis.
Tachlis, oh, I'm coming to that. So very courageous and resilient. Like, the people, my friend on the kibbutz had been in 6 wars. It's like, how could you have lived your life and have fought in 6 wars? So, they're very the level of having to do things, and never be a friar. Never be a fool, never be taken advantage of. So I think
Yeah,
this thing about being courageously experimental, adaptive, and resilience is just such an admirable quality of the Israelis and the stories. And you meet someone, and then if you ask the questions, and then they start to tell you their story, you just like go, oh my God, And my husband's just telling me, I met someone today who's never left East Bentley, here in Melbourne. And I'm going, oh my God. Yeah.
yeah,
So the other thing, everyone talks about Israeli chutzpah. And when you speak to an Israeli, they go, oh, it's just where, we've got chutzpahdik. But it's actually more than that. So they are audacious, they are disruptive, argumentative, and challenging, and extremely self confident. But it's important to understand that, this is a mindset of, you're never going to get me again. I'll never be vulnerable. I'll always be able to stand up for myself. And Davka, I'll just do it anyway. No one
yeah,
will, I don't
yeah,
need your permission. I don't
yeah.
need your approval. I don't need your acceptance. So
And tell me, how did you experience that as somebody who comes from a very polite and calm culture? How
I'm
was it for
also,
you?
we had Jewish mothers in outside of
Oh.
Israel. We have Jewish mothers. So we learn chutzpah at a very young age. I think it's sort of a Jewish thing. It's not just Israeli.
Yeah.
I actually really liked it. I liked the bold confidence. I liked their willingness to provocate and disrupt, and I didn't mind that. What I did find challenging was when I'd met somebody for 5 minutes and they'd ask me what I did, and I would tell them, and then they think they could go off and do it themselves,
Of course.
but
And
without,
and better.
oh yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
and one of the very funny stories that I learned from these interviews. That I talked to Benny Schlick, and he told me a very, very funny story. And I always it's when we talk about Israelis, I'm always reminded about his story. He says that in the PISA test, the test for kids, that want to test out your math skills and language skills and so forth. So it's done all over the world. And at one stage, I don't know if it's like one time or they always do it, they asked how sure you are on the result that you will succeed. And Israelis, they're not that good in math, although people think that like startup nation should be really good at math. So no, we're next to Mexico or something like that. So we're not good. And when you were asked how sure you are with the results, we got first. Which is so Israeli. They're so sure that they know. It doesn't matter. They don't they don't let the facts confuse them in any sense.
I think that's really important. Is that you know is that self-efficacy? That belief in self. And I think it does come from a lot from spending time in the IDF and that whole notion of networks for life. Where they are taught leadership and team skills. It is an open innovation society. It's not hierarchical. There's lots of mentoring. They pay it forwards. They team and lead the hard way. I love Dov Froman's book. I think that was the other thing that woke me up, Startup Nation and the book Dov Froman wrote. So that ability to collaborate through necessity and lead by example. I mean, there's so many heroic stories, and everybody has lost a husband or a father or a brother or a son or a cousin, so it does have that that closeness. Yeah. So there's the other point I think that really drives it is when I won one of my first projects. I looked at the team. So it was with an HR team in a global security software organization. And there was one person from Brazil, we had Moroccan background, one had Polish background, one was a Sabra. I think the other one might have been Algerian, and somebody was from somewhere else. Is that there is just so much diversity, there's just so many different cultures, and that makes Israeli men incredibly attractive.
Really?
And Israeli
I
women.
can trust you on that one.
but that whole thing of diversity is just remarkable, and we say that innovation comes from experimentation and it comes from difference, so you've got this ability to maximize that, and the resourcefulness of the different cultures, and the willingness to share, and the sechel, or the smarts, people really aspire. I mean, it's as Addie says, it's a small market, so to be successful, you've got to be really good. You've got to be really smart.
Yeah.
So they're some of those. And I think your point, Addie, building on that, is experimentation is everything, and improvisation. I really learned about, and I've explored that a lot more, the notion of, if you're in the IDF and you're in a valley and you're facing 500 enemy tanks and you're on your own, as has happened, you've got to improvise a way out. And that's what they do. They're just amazing how they can just think on their feet. Not always, what was the word? They don't always make themselves popular.
No.
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 But they will make themselves heard.
Heard for sure. I travel a lot with the family, with the kids, and there are some places that we go and we know that it doesn't matter. This is how we speak, and we'll be so prominent. We'll go into a restaurant and we'll be the only table heard because we're so loud. That's why we like to go to Spain and Italy, because we're not that out of order.
Different.
Yeah.
Well, my husband and I go, oh yeah, well, let's do it the Israeli way, So,
What
for
does that
example,
mean?
well, here in Australia, you line up. If you're sometimes if you're in the supermarket, you'll line up for the cashier. In Israel, you just elbow your way in and put your things at the front of the line and make everybody wait while you go and get the rest of what you want, so you can be
Yeah.
first in line. I know it's an
Yeah.
extreme example.
Yeah.
So
No, it's not extreme in Israel, but we split. We do it wisely. You could stay and he will go and bring all the other stuff. Like, we're very
yeah,
wise on that one. The fact that you're talking about the line, it's so Israeli that you never have really a line. It will always be like a zigzag in a sense. And it's like the line is like, no way. Like, it's like reinventing the line each place that you go. It doesn't matter, in the post office, in the supermarket. It's like, but what you're saying is, it sounds like something that it's hard to really create a formula for. How do you formalize what we're talking about and teach that afterwards? So how did you create a program from it?
Oh, that's a good question. So that was really my inspiration, and of course, I really loved living there. So that really opened up a new, we would say, it created an opening and a doorway and a threshold for me to really look at, well, this tiny country is really a model of the future, and I could sense this 11 years ago or 10 years ago when I was there. So these guys have learned how to adapt, in an unstable world and innovate and be really, globally remarkable. So there's something here to learn from. So I started not only to research the Israeli culture, but to re-educate myself in the whole innovation space. So people who work in innovation are incredibly generous. So I networked through LinkedIn and met amazing people who really helped me. And I did a series of online learning programs. So this is before online became what it is today, and really immersed myself in learning about innovation for a couple of years and started to put together my own curriculum. And then I needed to have a community, so I joined the International Coach Federation and got myself accredited. And then I thought, well, I'll design a course to teach how to innovate like an Israeli. So I initially designed the Coach for Innovators certified program and started delivering that online, and iterated and pivoted and started all the things I'd never done before, blogging and doing webinar, everything that's commonplace today. I'd never done a webinar in my life, and there I was, doing global webinars and writing blogs and marketing this program to coaches without knowing what I didn't know. And and over the years, I've learned a lot by doing, by experimenting, by failing. Had some great failures, and just stayed with it. And I think I always look back when I'm facing my own failures and setbacks and challenges is to sustain my determination and my resilience without losing my compassion and, my ability to care for what I'm doing. So I try to
This is
practice what I teach. Yeah.
this is what Churchill said, that success is going from
Oh,
failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. That's
yeah.
what
Oh,
he
it's a
said.
good one. I
Yeah.
hadn't heard that. So, over time, it's really interesting because in our learning programs, we invite people to bring a business problem or opportunity to the program that they use as what we call an action learning assignment. And that's sort of like what I've done over time is used certainly the last 10 years as my action learning assignment to come up with now a business. I suppose you'd have to say, I don't think the vision or the passionate purpose has changed much, but strategically how we operate today is nothing like what I had expected. And our products that are now validated and verified, and of course I'm highly credentialed and I certify other people as coaches for innovation. We the product and the business model is nothing like where I started, and I think that's the beauty of working in this space is your ability to adapt and advance and iterate and pivot, to give the customer something that they truly appreciate and cherish.
So
So
what do you
yeah.
think is, like, you learn from it? So what is the most important aspect of innovation culture and leadership as you see it?
I think it's where we got to, and certainly in our work, it comes down. Oh gosh, where to begin? I think the 21st. So you asked me about Israel. So I started to model, and I thought, well, if the Israelis do it with my background, I can replicate it, and I can teach it. So yeah, we can teach people to innovate like an Israeli. Um, that's definitely possible because our work is founded on mindset shifting or mindset change. So yeah, that is possible. Anyone can do it. My teacher said, possible in the world, possible for me. It's only a matter of how. I think Israel is a great example of 21st century future fitness. So the ability to dance with disruption and to dance on the edge of your comfort zone is key. You know, adapt and dance. At the moment, you're being politically pulled back.
Like I would say we're frozen for the last 2 years, but
Yeah, but
like
that's going to
four
happen.
elections in 2 years, I would say that's an accomplishment, right?
That's going to happen when people resist change, you know, and you have to change. And you've got,
Right.
you've got a leader who is, it's such a great example, who is resisting the change that the country really needs to evolve to its next level of evolution. I mean,
Yeah,
it's pretty obvious to people like you and I, not
of
necessarily
course.
to certain people whose names shall not
But
be mentioned.
I heard Yuval Noah Harari. You know him? He's a historian, philosopher, and he writes books about the history of mankind. And he
Oh,
talks
of
about,
course. Yeah.
right? And he talked about the revolution. So, like in societies, we need people who are traditional, who wants to live as is, the culture, everything just to stay, and people who want to advance and to change. And the balance between these two needs to be suitable to what is needed. Because if you change too fast, it cannot work because it will go to extreme. And if you stay, you will not be able to go with what is changing in the world and really stay alive and sustain yourself. And in Israel, it's so tight, like 50-50. So it's at that time, it's like freezing because no, like all these four elections, none of these sides was major enough, and persistent enough in order to go and do the change other than
Yep.
and especially right now, you feel like people are starting to be so like four is like enough. I think I would say one is enough, but nobody asked me, and you feel it, and you feel it in this society. So you think that this ability to dance with change and uncertainty is the most important part in order to be an innovation leader?
Yes, and there's some and. So what we say is you've sort of like what I had to do when I got to Israel, I had to unlearn and adopt a beginner's mind so that you can come from not knowing. I think also is to embrace this, oh, to say, really just take risks. I mean, you got to go to the edges because that's where the fruit is. So I think becoming a smart and calculated risk taker, being willing to improvise, challenge the status quo. I think just because the way we've always done it doesn't mean that's the way we have to do it. And my favorite term is, rather than say to be argumentative, is orchestrate constructive conflict. So like here in Australia, we're so scared of being disapproved of or not being seen as a friend to someone. So, we a leader has to be provocative and evocative, in unlocking people's potential. And I think with so much technological change and exponential change generally, people have to know how to get the best out of their people to unlock their potential. And we say to unleash their collective genius. So it's technology and people. And just, be hopeful and optimistic and positive, even though there's so many things going on that are so, offensive and violate our values. We have to stay hopeful and optimistic and positive and adaptive. But they're different terms to what we've used in leadership before. And I think Israel's really shone a light, especially when Dov Froman said leadership today is like flying an aeroplane through a hurricane. or through a storm. That's a quote
Yeah.
I remember from his book. So, it is a great model to learn from, and it does have, like everything, pros and cons.
Yeah.
But if you have an open mind, I think that's the beauty of the Israelis, is their, willingness to learn from anything and everything, and that's really powerful.
So I would ask you the last question. So what is the most surprising thing you learned about innovation after so many years of doing that?
Oh gosh, most surprising thing I've learned about innovation um, is that, having worked for 32 years, pretty much consulting, training, facilitating, and coaching on the people side of change, I still find it really hard to believe that people still think innovation is about technology. I
Yeah.
think, and I've been beaten up at conferences, by the process guys. Get rid of the people. The people just resist change.
Yeah.
So,
It's
um,
it's a very technological, manly point of view, right? So there
yes,
is this ability why people don't adjust. Like they are just interfering, these people, with the capability of technology, but actually they need to use it, they need to utilize it, and it should be beneficial for them. Other than
yes,
that, there is no reason for technology, right? So
I know it's a bit of a no-brainer. I think the other thing, especially with the innovation team coaching programs we're doing at the moment, is that innovation doesn't stand alone. An organization needs to come up with its own definition of innovation. It needs to also be part of the strategy, and there needs to be a vision for innovation. But what we've learned is that we're now integrating innovation with change management, with team development, and with coaching. So, it's definitely a must-have approach for 21st century success, whether you're an individual, a team, or an organization. I hate to say it, but it's innovate or die. Innovation is but it's what serves society. Innovation, if you think of, once department stores were in innovation, once upon it, if you read Stephen Johnson's work, who I love, all these novel ideas were once just an idea in someone's imagination. So, we need innovation to flourish as a society, no matter
yeah.
how hard it is for some people to change. So you,
Yeah.
you will, Addy, you will get out of the frozen zone in
I
time, but it's
hope. I really
it,
hope. Like when you're talking about change, I always think about it as a entity, organism that, in order to survive, it needs to reshape itself and
yes,
regrow
adapt. Yep.
and adapt. And what you said about unlearn, some of the cells need to die in order to have the resources and energy and ability for the young one's ideas and whatever, like, to grow. And it's the same within a culture, it's the same within a state, it's the same within
Yes.
humanity. We need to unlearn some of the things that we've done, and then
Yes.
do things that are better, in a sense, that are more adaptive, that are better for us, for society, so forth.
And there's a yes and for that. It's like when I got to Israel, I had to let go of all of what I knew in order to create the empty space, or now we call it the transition, or for the new to emerge. And I think that's a little bit where Israel is right now. You're in the bottom of the U. You're in for a systemic change, and I think at the edges you're finding that you might have to collaborate more closely with the Israeli Arabs, which people are resisting like crazy.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah.
a bit of a blinding flash of the obvious. So, you need to let go to let come. It's,
Ah, let's come. I never heard
yeah,
this term. Let's come.
yeah,
That, I love it.
yep.
Let's go
And
to let's come.
it's bubbling away down there, you know.
I
It is
hope,
wanting to emerge. It is, but there's a few barriers that you might have to encourage getting rid of.
we really hope for a change in that aspect for sure. So I want to thank you for your time and just ask you, where could people hear from you and contact you and hear about ImagineNation?
Okay, thank you. So, ImagineNation, as you can see on the screen, .com.au, and also at janetsernack.com.au. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can sign up for our newsletter. And if you contact me, actually, I'm naughty because I'm not very good at self-promoting. If you send me an email to this address, I'll just put it, Julie's going to kill me. I will give you a coupon to get the super early bird savings of US $400 on the next coach program that is starting on the 4th of May, so
So
that
I'll
you
add,
too, there you go, I did it.
great. Yeah, I'll add the link to the video, so they just click it and then they have it. So I
Yeah,
want to thank you, Janet, for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always, and fun for me just to think about things that are, they might be like, like fish in the water. I don't see the water, so you've shown me this water that time. So thank you, Janet.
you're so welcome, and thank you for having me.
Sure. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. You're much invited to go and visit invincibleinnovation.com. And I'll see you next week with another insightful talk. See ya.
Thank you.